Welcome into this oral history for the Archives of Iowa Broadcasting, along with producer Cliff Brockman. My name is Paul Yeager, and our guest today is Bob Fisher on this, the 15th of December, 2025. Hello, Mr. Fisher.
Mr. Yeager, it's an honor to be asked to do this today, so I appreciate you asking.
Well, your career, Bob, has spanned many changes in the industry, but not as many changes in your zip code. So that gives you a great perspective of things. You are a North Iowa native, right?
Mason City native, graduated from Mason City High School in 1990, and then went down to the University of Iowa for 4 years, and then after that, came back here.
When you went to Iowa, what was the goal?
Well, the original goal when I went to the University of Iowa was I was going to be a high school band director because I was a 3-time All-State musician, a low brass guy, and I was excelling in music. I thought maybe music was supposed to be my career, but music actually led me to the career of radio because it was through the Hawkeye Marching Band, which I was a part of, that I met the general manager of then the student-run radio station, KRUI. John Barker was the guy's name. We were good friends, and he thought at one point, maybe I should try radio, and the rest is history, I guess.
Do you think there was ever a thought in your mind about radio or it was all band director when you graduated from Mason City?
I think there was a little bit in the back of my mind that maybe possibly, someday something could happen that I would dive into it. But, the path that I've taken, since high school, I never would have written that out. I just, a luck chance to know John and him asking me to get involved in at KRUI, and got to do some sports and just a little on-air shift as well. So it was a good experience.
So it was more that radio broadcasting and radio worked and music didn't? It wasn't one of those situations?
Well, it was a case of just some things didn't work out very well. And on the music side, kind of butted heads with one of my tuba euphonium professor on a few things, and that kind of led things downhill. But I mean, I still enjoyed, a lot of music related things through the college days. Like I say, part of the Hawkeye Marching Band and Hawkeye Pep Band, which took me, a number of great places like the Rose Bowl and Holiday Bowl and New York City for the Kickoff Classic in 1992, and played in the top concert band there, the UI Symphony Band. I had 1 year where I played in Johnson County Landmark, the top jazz band. So I was able to balance the music and, working at KRUI thing.
It wasn't anything to do with ear training, didn't treat you well academically?
No.
Okay. Well, let's go. You mentioned the era that you were there at the University of Iowa. At what point did you kind of have your eye wander up to the press box? I mean, yes, you're already kind of involved with radio, but when you looked up and saw Jim Zabel and Bob Brooks and Frosty Mitchell up there.
Well, when you're on the field at the Hawkeye, Hawkeye football game with a marching band, obviously you did see all those banners up there, including also there was one other banner that I saw, KGLO, because Tim Fleming, who used to sit in this seat, he was doing Hawkeye games back then. So yeah, just seeing that and, in the back of my mind, I was one day thinking, I wonder what it's like in the press box and what it might be like to call a game in that press box. And have not done that, but that does go through your mind when you're standing on the field with 70,000 people around you at the stadium.
First on-air shift to your first play-by-play shift, which one put more fear into you?
Since I did an on-air shift probably before play-by-play, or at least did something on air, that obviously was first, just because, just like anything else, it's the first time you do something, you don't know if you know what you're doing. You just, you have those jitters and everything. But then later, a month or so after that, it was, well, you're going to do color commentary on a University of Iowa women's basketball game. And then 2 weeks later, it's your turn to try to do play-by-play. And
what year are you in school?
This would be doing women's basketball will be January 1994. The first game that I did color commentary was Iowa, Minnesota at home at Carver Hawkeye Arena. And then a couple of weeks later, the opportunity that I got to do play-by-play for the first time, it was Vivian Stringer, the coach then at the University of Iowa. It was her 500th win. And I got to do the second half of that game and call the final minutes of her picking up her 500th career victory. So that's always, I've always remembered that as a benchmark of getting things started. I think it was January 26th or 28th or something like that in 1994. And it's been fun to do play-by-play ever since, and did basketball and then did a little baseball the following spring at KRIB.
So it hooked you.
I got hooked. I definitely got hooked doing play-by-play. And
what do you recall? So at that time, student radio station, you were up in row 15 or whatever that is where the press area is, or were you courtside?
No, it was where that, I have not been in Carver Hawkeye Arena in such a long time. I don't know if they still have that media section or not, but you're up about 15, 16 rows from the floor. And at that point, it was Mike Knoll was doing the games, of course, for the Palmer Network as it was back then. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the local radio stations in Iowa City was still doing Iowa women's games as well. So, I mean, we were in there. We were 3 or 4 different, of course, then the visiting radio crews would always be there as well. So it was usually a pretty packed press row.
So obviously you mentioned the coach Stringer. So at that point, do you realize, I mean, have you gone back and listened to that and did I capture it accurately?
Those games I really haven't went back and listened to much, I guess. I mean, I probably did, 25 or so years ago, but, not as of recent. I would like to go back and, listen back at some point. I've got to dig those out, and I just moved home. So I kind of boxed everything up, and it's probably going to not find them for a while, but there'll be some day where I'll go back and listen to those games and think, yeah, I could have improved that. Yeah, I could have improved that. I mean, if you're somebody that listens back to your ball games, you're always picking out things that, I could have done this correctly, or maybe, change how you're wording this or that, and, trying to describe the action.
Well, you had to probably use some of that to get a job.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, I had to make a resume tape and, hand it out to a few different places and see if somebody would end up hiring me. And, the baseball was fun too, just from the fact of, it was, you start out the season in cold, snowy weather in the Big Ten. And I remember an Iowa-Michigan game where it was snowing at first pitch. And you kind of wonder, how do they play baseball in this type of weather? And how do they, how can they even do this up in our neck of the woods playing in the snow?
And then baseball was that. So basketball, baseball, those are your two sports you did at the university.
Women's basketball and the baseball.
Yeah. Okay. So then tell me about finding that first job.
Well, after that spring, I moved back to Mason City, and I started working part-time in the fall of 1994 for what was then just KRIB and KLSS Radio, which was owned by Hedberg Broadcasting. Mark Hedberg was the general manager and the main owner at that point, and his offices were in Mason City. And there was part-time opening, do things like run the Hawkeye games. We had the Learfield Network with Bob Brooks, and we were also on KRIB. We were running North Iowa Huskies junior hockey games of the United States Hockey League, and it was doing the old Saturday, Sunday shifts of you probably you close down the station on Saturday night and you come right back on Sunday morning and start running the church services or programs. I think we had like Dick Clark's Rock and Remember, those type of shows on, and would work 6 to noon on Sundays. And then, once in a while, if there was a spot needing to fill in and they just had some problems trying to get the schedule figured out, I would end up doing a board shift for one of the regular full-timers. And I was also doing a little bit of work, doing a little bit of just maybe local news, just kind of as a job shadow to the news director back then.
Well, so before those shifts became open, when your early years of your board or early time of your board op,
right.
Is your voice heard? in Mason City,
Yes.
in Clear Lake?
Yes. I
It
was,
is. Okay.
you do the, you would do the weather forecast. You would do the, just the, sometimes on the weekend shifts, it just wasn't those syndicated programs. It was actually doing, 3 hours of live music and doing a regular board shift. And yeah, people would hear me fill in with the weather and all that other fun things that you would do on a weekend.
Well, people would be your classmates and their parents
Right.
and their friends.
Yes.
What was that like when they started saying, "Hey, Bob, I heard you on the radio"?
They were, is that you? That'd be the big thing. Is that really you? Yeah, that's me. And, the other favorite question too through the years has been, well, why don't you have an air name? That's different than it's like, well, if you guys already know who I am, why would I change my name? Sounds kind of ridiculous, doesn't it? But no, it was always good to get that feedback, especially in the part-time days that people definitely were listening.
And this part-time thing is, is it summer of 94, fall of 94
Actually
then?
started the late August of 94 and then
Okay.
went to March of 95 or April of 95. And I was still looking for full-time jobs at that point. And I did land in April of 1995 out at Decorah at KDC AM and FM at that point, and doing news and doing some Decorah sports. I was able to do one summer of Decorah Vikings baseball and softball. And then in July 1995, at the beginning of July, Mark Hedberg, who I mentioned earlier, called me back up and said, I've got a situation here. I've got an opening in Spirit Lake and my radio station's there. Now, here's what I can do. You can take that news opening over in Spirit Lake and move over there. Or I could see if somebody on the current staff of Mason City who I think might be interested in going over to Spirit Lake, I can see if he wants that job and I can slide you in back here to our radio stations. And I said, well, why don't you just see what George Bauer, who was the person he was thinking of at that time, see what he wants to do. And whatever he wants to do, I'll definitely make a decision off of that. And I think if George wanted to stay, I might have taken the Spirit Lake job. I'm not quite sure. Just to stay, Mark Hedberg had definitely been nice enough to give me a part-time job and really had, praised me for the job of being a part-timer. And fortunately, George is still up in the Spirit Lake and Spencer area. So that was a great move for him 30 years later. And I was able to come back and do, at that point, July of 95, just news and an on-air shift from 10:30 to 1:30 on KLSS. But that was the only thing I was guaranteed at that point.
And news. That's it.
And news
and the on-air shift. No sports.
No sports at that point. It was a month later that a member of the Clear Lake Booster Club that was good friends with Mark Hedberg came to him and said, hey, the other radio stations that have been covering Clear Lake sports for years, they kind of took a dump on us and we're looking for somebody to do the games. Would you have any interest in carrying Clear Lake games on one of your radio stations? And Mark went back to that person and said, well, I've got a guy here that is on my staff full time and just moved back here to Mason City. I think I better find him a play-by-play job. Otherwise, he might end up not sticking here for very long because he's going to want to do play-by-play at some point. He moved home just to be back at home, and now he's here on the staff and got to find him some play-by-play opportunities.
Was that accurate? Was that an accurate statement?
That was a very accurate statement. I think I probably would have continued to have looked for play-by-play jobs at that point because I knew that was something that I was interested in and definitely wanted to continue to do that in radio.
And so we're talking football of 1995?
Fall of 95.
Was that your first Clear Lake?
Football was the first thing. And that was definitely interesting because at that point, I really didn't know the game of football very well, or at least how to translate the game of football onto the radio. And I definitely did have struggles doing football at that point. And fortunately, the guy that was my color commentator, Dave Tice, who was my color commentator for 20 plus years, he helped after a little encouragement from his wife to kind of shepherd me through some of those stumbling blocks, problems that I was having doing the games. And once we finally got that taken care of, and I started to learn the game of football better, things obviously got better. Just once again, just like going back to what we talked about at KRUI, you got to get it on the air and you got to do it before you know what problems you're going to run into. And it's just a case of continuing to try to make yourself better.
Now, this is the part of the interview, Bob, where I need you to think about equipment that you had, and situation and staff. So, board operator back at KRIB,
And a board operator back at KRIB.
oh, and are you using a telephone line?
We were using for away games phone lines, and whatever the phone box of that brand was. I can't remember what exactly we were using back then. But home games, we rigged up a Marty unit, and it was just within the range of beaming it back to the station on 400 block at 19th Street Southwest of Mason City, and it sounded fine. And uh, those days I don't miss of using a Marty, because you got to drag around a big Marty unit and a whole bunch of other stuff, a mic mixer to stick into the Marty and everything. So definitely things have changed.
And you're using, of course, you're using headsets and things like
Right.
that. Crowd mic and sideline reporter, or
Crowd mic at that point, we didn't really have a sideline reporter on a regular basis. There was a point, like I mentioned, Dave Tice was my main color commentator's name, and then Dave Fritz, who had helped me with wrestling a little bit when I started to do wrestling, maybe a year or two later. We kind of had a three-man booth for a while, late 90s, early 2000s, and then Dave moved to Las Vegas to run a couple of business colleges out there. So then at that point, it was just Dave Tice and I. But Dave Fritz came back eventually after he retired from doing that, and we got to be a three-man crew again. And then Dave Tice passed away in the spring of 2019. So since that time, it's just been Dave Fritz and I doing the games, and it was a good three-man crew. A lot of people wondered, how can you do a three-man crew for a high school game? It worked out fine. I mean, the two Daves did not talk over each other, or if they did, it was it sounded good. There was rarely a time where it sounded like it was a big clash of three voices on the air, but it was definitely good.
what? Speaking of good, was the football team good at that time?
Let's see, 95, it was, they missed the playoffs, I think, by a game, lost a game.
Okay, so
Go ahead.
they're good. They're good.
Yeah.
Not great yet. So there's interest. The community wants to hear it. And this advances. So you start off with football. What other sports did you do for Clear Lake?
In the first year, it was football, and then we did basketball in boys and girls basketball. And then we grew from there. From the year, the following years, Clear Lake had good baseball and softball teams at that point too. So obviously there was interest in carrying some of the baseball and softball games. We added wrestling as well. Dave Fritz helping me out on that for a while. And I'm trying to think, we really didn't do any other high school sports, I guess, but it was
No volleyball.
No, we did a little volleyball. There was at one point, I had a person that was working for me that was able to do volleyball. I guess I've never done volleyball. I don't know if that maybe I have something to learn in my latter years here. I can do that.
You learned the fundamentals of football pretty well, so volleyball could be your thing. So tell me about the ownership situation there. And at this point, you're doing news in addition to Clear Lake Sports. So at this point in the community in the mid '90s, Mason City, Clear Lake, what's the competition like?
Well, the competition is, and boy, I can't remember who owned at that point KGLO and a couple of other radio stations, 93.9 The Country Moose and 103.7, which at that point I still, I believe, was the Fox. That was the 103.7 was on 103.1 a long time ago. It's the station that is licensed to Clear Lake. And so those three, I can't remember if there's a fourth. Yes, there was a fourth station that was housed in this building that I'm in right now. 98.7, which I don't think was Kiss Country at that point. It was actually a more contemporary format, if I remember correctly. So those four stations were in this building that I'm in right now. We were out at 402 19th Street Southwest. And, that was the main competition at that point. Kolof's had KLEW in Forest City, and the company that owned these radio stations also had the radio stations in Charles City. Hampton was, 30 miles down the road to the south of us. So there was, that was, I guess, what we really consider a competition.
At what point did the ownership change?
For our stations, it was Mark Hedberg sold out to a company that was called Three Eagles in, I believe, 1998. And Three Eagles owned KRIB and KLSS. And then in the late 90s, we bought the station that was licensed to Northwood, KYTC, which is a 102.7. And those studios moved into our building out on 19th Street Southwest. And then once we had the got moved all over here, we still have that radio station as part of our current ownership group.
And at what point then, Three Eagles, I remember Three Eagles, and then I think there starts to be, I won't say a carousel, but it did kind of change quite a bit there.
Well, you got to 2007 and 2008, and that's when Clear Channel or iHeartMedia or whatever it was called back at that point, they decided we're going to get rid of everything that is not in the top 100 markets. We don't want anything that's in the smaller markets. So that created an interesting situation here because the Koloff family and, Tony Koloff and Jim Koloff, they had wanted, they've always wanted a Mason City-based radio station. Three Eagles was looking to capture some radio stations as well. So that situation is what made up the current ownership, or at least the way the radio stations are split here. Because in this building, Three Eagles took KGLO and the Country Boost, KIA, and kept the other three radio stations, KRIB, KLSS, and KYTC. The other stations that were in this building went with Kolof's downtown, or they went to downtown. They've been based downtown since 2008, since the purchase. And so they took those two radio stations. They took the Charles City radio stations as well that were owned by Clear Channel at that point, Charles City and New Hampton. And I guess that's how the split up ended up. So you've got the 5 stations that we decided to move from 19th Street Southwest out here to this building. That building was not going to be able to house 5 radio stations out on 19th Street Southwest. The KRIB tower is still there, and the transmitter building, obviously. But it's been an interesting move, especially since we had some competing heads in both buildings now joining to be one team. And I think it worked out pretty well overall.
Were the jobs changing when the ownership, or when ownership's all under one roof, or all these stations under one roof? I mean, it sounds like there's always room for efficiencies, and that means somebody doesn't stay.
Well, at the end of 2008, there were some cuts. There was, I believe, a couple of staff members that were cut, one on air. One was a person that was working with me in the news department. And yeah, it was just a point where, Three Eagles grew a little bit too much. I mean, we've never heard that in the radio industry at all, have we? But that was the case. There were some growing pains with that purchase. And unfortunately, a couple people did get laid off. And, we moved you just move forward. You move forward as best as you can.
Through all of this, you're still doing Clear Lake Sports.
Through, since the fall of 95, I've been able to continue to do Clear Lake Sports. And, that's been a positive to be able to keep covering the same school on a regular basis. And, the people at Clear Lake, even, in that first season back in the fall of 95, they made sure that they reached out and they were like friends and family to me. And those people are still friends and family to me. When we had, the little unemployment timing a year ago, this past summer, or a year ago in 2024, the summer of 2024, I mean, people were coming up to me and worried that I wasn't going to have a job, or wasn't worried that they weren't going to have their coverage of their kids or grandkids. And, just having that was it tugs at your heart that people would go out of their way to make sure that, hey, is everything okay? Or is anything ever going to be back to normal? Unfortunately, it ended up being.
We could say what is normal in all
Yeah,
of
that's true.
this, but I mean, let's face it, Bob. You are the voice of Clear Lake sports for generations, and you are probably now to the point.
Oh, yes.
I don't think you've been to grandkids of guys that you covered and gals that you covered in '95, but for sure,
Yes.
kids of athletes you've covered there in the mid '90s when you started.
Clear Lake had a championship football team in 2000, and there are at least two, if not more, kids of kids that were playing on that 2000 championship team, and they're actually in high school right now. And just finding out all those connections as we work down the family tree, and kind of remembering them when they were in their career 20, 25, 30 years ago, and now seeing the success of their kids. Yeah, it's starting to get to that point where you start trying to keep tabs of family trees.
And you know where all the venues are at. There's probably not a place up in your area that you've not been to covering Clear Lake over the years.
That's a good question. I think there's pretty much in the 9-county area. I think I've been to every gym, or almost. Football obviously is a little bit different because you don't get to go to the, if you're playing football for Clear Lake, you're not playing the Lake Millses or the Northwick Kensets or anything. But once in a while, fit into a playoff game when Clear Lake has an early exit or didn't make the playoffs. You get to see a whole bunch of venues up here. Absolutely.
You adopt a new team.
That's right. You adopt a new team for a couple of weeks and move forward.
All right, let's discuss for a moment your news career, because Bob, I don't know if there's anybody that can do what you do, in the sense of city council meeting at 4:30 on a Friday, and then you're in the car to Humboldt to make kickoff at 7:00. And that has kind of been your life for this whole time too. Talk to me about how you balance those two.
Time management has obviously been a big thing that I've had to deal with. Yeah, basically the whole career. I mean, here's a good example this week. There's a school board meeting tonight. When we're recording this, that is a big deal to Mason City. They're going to close one of the elementary schools. What's going to happen? That's obviously going to affect everybody. We have 3 basketball games I'm covering this week on Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday nights. Mason City City Council meets on Tuesday night. Well, I'll probably come home from the basketball games. Fortunately, the games are in Clear Lake, so I don't have to travel, but I'll probably just try to scramble and put together something for at least one newscast in the morning to at least make it look like I've covered that meeting in full detail. I'll go back later in the day and watch the rest of the meeting, but I try to at least get one thing out of that meeting and turn it around for the morning. I mean, there's just so many examples of that. And now my new time management issue the last couple of weeks has been adding 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock in the morning, doing a 3-hour morning show on KGLO, because we wanted to get some local radio back on this radio station again. So yes, it is an exercise 100% of the time in time management, just trying to figure out I'm supposed to be at what meeting or what game or whatever, what night, what afternoon, what morning. I mean, sometimes it's, yes, it is a big scramble, and thankfully we've got Google calendars and everything else to give us notifications to remind us where I'm supposed to be.
Because it sounds like you don't have much of a news staff where you're at now.
Well, I'm it.
Am I looking at it?
You're looking at the news staff. You're looking at what's been the news staff since the end of 2008. But there, like you mentioned the word efficiencies, a couple moments ago, and it's been a case of that. I mean, you've tried to balance what the companies have decided have had to have been efficiencies for them. You do what you can, and I think most of the people through the years have understood that there's going to be those times where, unfortunately, I can't be 3 places at once, let alone 2. And we're going to try our best to try to at least follow up on what we need to with those stories. But there's just cases where I can't be every place at once. And, I do feel bad at times, but there's other times where it just goes, just like I could do what I can do. And, you know, hopefully we can put on the best presentation to our listeners as possible.
When you started doing news back in 95, I'm guessing KIMT TV had probably a newsroom of about 9 or 10 that would go out and cover stories. That's being generous.
I was going to say,
The newspaper.
Are you speaking from experience, or?
I'm just throwing out numbers here. I didn't count them in my head. The newspaper probably had anywhere from 3 to 6 reporters based in town.
Right.
What are the numbers at those two places now?
Well, let's see. KIMT, for the majority of their operation, it is based in Rochester, Minnesota. I do not believe they have anybody actually on the ground that is based out of the Mason City office. They did for a few years until that person decided not to renew their contract. The Globe Gazette, and obviously, newspaper, that landscape has changed so much. I mean, they've got maybe down to 2 or 3 news reporters at a time and maybe one sports guy. And of course, they've cut back to 3 days or 4 days a week. And, the print time, their deadline times are at 5 o'clock instead of, hey, let's wait until that final ball game gets phoned into the newsroom with a story or a score there. Those landscapes have absolutely changed, and that's been noticeable in this town. And, I guess I've tried to fill in that gap of what people think is a local news gap in this town.
Well, that's where I'm going. What is your role as the news person? You are the news person in town, Bob.
And that's, and not to jump forward, but I mean, coming back here to KGLO after having not been here for 18 months, people obviously have expressed how much they've missed local news, even though I was doing local news, quote unquote, down the street for, about 14 months. They weren't going to those radio stations because they weren't news and information driven like the radio stations in this building, this in KGLO specifically. And, fortunately, people have shown that they, still have that desire to have local news. There's still, these stations are still relevant in the community, because I know a lot of people think radio is not relevant anymore. And I honestly was starting to wonder that as well, maybe a couple of months before, we had our layoffs here. March, April of 2024, I was in the back of my mind, like, well, are we still relevant in the community? Are we still doing, is the job that we're doing, is it worth it in the community? And then, of course, we had the layoffs in May 2024, and people were outraged then. And that kind of shut me up on wondering if radio was relevant in our community then. And then, coming back here in the last month or two, the announcement that I was coming back to KGLO and, the other radio stations in this building, just to see the outpouring of, thanks to that, for coming back, and for the company to, know the new company to know that, local radio is a necessity in this type of a community, because nobody else is getting the message out. And we need that on these radio stations. And, the community outpouring has just been great.
So you're laid off from the station you're at now. You end up at, as you say, down the street. Koloff Media picks you up. Then there's the opportunity to return to KGLO because the ownership saw value in needing local news. Do I have that? Did I summarize your last 18 months of your life, Bob?
Alpha Media had a whole bunch of layoffs in May 2024, and they had layoffs 2 weeks before we got laid off in Moberly, Missouri. And when we saw those, that they cut the whole staff there, we were starting to wonder, are we next? And we were next 2 weeks later. So there were 4 people that were laid off in this building. There was one that was, Joe Malone was our on-air man on KLSS, and he's been relegated to a more behind-the-scenes thing at this point. Putting together commercials and whatnot, and maybe doing some community interviews that, can be put on the air once in a while. But local radio was just gutted out of these 5 radio stations. And then Alpha Media sold their radio stations to a group called Connoisseur Media out of the Northeast. And Jeff Warshaw, one of the first conversations he had with the general manager in my building, I believe, was, well, what are you doing for things like local news or anything local? And when the general manager told him back, we don't have any local news. We don't have anybody local on the air. Alpha gutted us. And then, he asked, well, what happened to the local news guy or whatever? And well, he's down working for the competition now. And Mr. Warshaw, I think, said at that point, that needs to change. We need to make these stations local again. And fortunately, he was able to loosen the purse strings a little bit to get me back. So.
And now morning show is a little different than news. Have you found that there was a big difference, or maybe it wasn't as much as you thought?
Well, and when we were just over at, the other building on 19th Street Southwest, when it was just KRIB and KLSS and KYTC, there had been a point where I had done mornings on KRIB just for the fact of, and it wasn't a case of we couldn't find anybody. It was just the way personnel were shifted around at that point. So, I mean, have I done a morning show before? Yes. Have I done a morning show like this where it's a lot of news and information, community interviews and things like that? It's definitely different, but it's not out of my wheelhouse. Obviously, interviewing people is part of the news job. So, there's no really difference between somebody coming in and asking about, talking about the Christmas cheer fund or what's going on with the homeless shelter or the Salvation Army this time of year, or what's going on at the McNider Art Museum or things like that. I mean, there's the same skill sets. I mean, it's just managing the time, and it's basically just a squeezed down version of what the morning show used to be before all those layoffs happened back in May 2024. So it wasn't not, upsetting the apple cart and trying to figure out what I was going to do. It was just basically, a little reorganization, and everything's been good here so far.
And again, efficiencies, if you're doing an interview about McNider, you could possibly use something out of that for a newscast later, I'm guessing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, think I've always, any community interviews that have been done on this radio station through the last, 15 or plus years or so, whenever they've had value to be repurposed, absolutely, they're going to go in the newscasts.
Bob, you've also had involvement in the Iowa Broadcast News Association, serving as president before. You understand what other stations, TV and radio, have been dealing with over your career. I'm guessing Mason City is not alone or exclusive in shifts in coverage and staffing.
Well, I mean, we look at radio stations, across the board. Yeah, I mean, we can name not only metro areas where radio stations, news staffs have been cut. They've been trimmed back, and smaller communities as well. And fortunately, there's a lot of owners that realize the importance of having local news and local programming with the radio stations. And obviously, I'm TV stations. I'm not knocking TV stations. It's just been once again, having to deal with budgets and having to deal with the economy and having to deal with efficiencies and how can those things be done better. Of course, technology is way different between 1995 and 2025. And, a lot of things change, and it's the adapting to change, obviously, is the big thing, whether it's radio or TV.
And let's also go through, when you look at the IBNA convention room, there's not that many that were there in 95 that are still there today.
No, personnel wise, I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot of. I even hate to start naming names of people that were in that room, and I didn't really get involved in the organization until about 2003. But remember J.K. Martin down in Burlington? Obviously, he was a great name that defined news in Burlington in his latter years. I mean, that's the one that pops up in my mind. Like I say, I hate to start naming names because I know I'm going to miss somebody, and it's I don't want to miss anybody that when we talk in conversations like this.
But obviously the landscape has changed, and the landscape has to be efficient, and you have to do social videos,
Yeah.
Facebook, X, there's blogs, there's websites to update. I mean, it's all part of that package. When you talk to students who are interested in getting into this, what do you tell them?
Well, I mean, I've got a good story about a high school student in Clear Lake that has expressed an interest in radio and has kind of job shadowed me a little bit. And now he's doing some things for the competing radio stations right now. He wants to be a play-by-play broadcaster. And, I've talked to him, and I tell him, just like I would have told anybody else that was either the high school or college age, make sure you do everything in radio and
Mhm.
TV, because for an example, I only was doing sports at KRUI, but I also, did an on-air shift, tried to, make, some promos and PSAs and whatnot. And, you learn how to run the board. You learn how to maybe do some news at that point. You got to do everything, because when you get past college, you don't know what job openings there are going to be, or more importantly, yes, with the landscape changing, if you're a jack of all trades, for lack of better words, you can do a little bit of everything. You're going to advance yourself further, because you may be able to open the door and then expand on that. And I guess, look at me. I mean, news was not my strong point in my mind back in 1994. Obviously, I did a little when I was part-timing at KRIB and KLSS. I was kind of, quote unquote, being an intern of news. I went and covered a court case for the news director back then. And obviously that grew on me. And then those first couple of years of doing news grew on me. And, then you take over a newsroom and try to grow it and make it better, and make it better at that point than the competition. And then able to take that success into when you get an opportunity to be on, your hometown news station, or I hate to say that, my hometown station. That's what I meant to say, not give the slogan for KGLO, but, uh, you know, that obviously growing up listening to this radio station and being over at the competition, well, I wanted to make that news department just like the one that it had been here. Then obviously with the merger of the radio stations, it's been a great opportunity to try to carry on that tradition.
And Bob, I'll go back to the school board meeting, to the football game. I mean, you've hosted debates for mayors. You've had council sessions. You've hosted governor debates. I mean, you've had politicians come through. What do you feel your role is in all of those?
Well, in a debate, or a political discussion, whatever you want to call it, candidate program, I mean, you want to try to ask them the questions that they need to answer. Obviously, if it's on the city level, if it's, how are those tax dollars going to be spent the best on streets? This project, that project going on in town. Are things being managed well at the city level? And that obviously works its way up through the legislature, the gubernatorial candidate level as well. You got to ask them the important questions. You can't, let them out of asking softball questions. You got to, you got to ask them the questions that people want to know. Otherwise, I mean, you're just, kind of wasting your time not asking those questions. You got to see what they're going to say.
And then you have to follow up, and that's the key skill too.
There's always a follow-up question to every question, I think. I mean, they give an answer. You kind of pick apart that answer in your mind, and sometimes you have to do it really quickly, especially in those situations where it's like, yeah, but let's look at this part of the equation. How doesn't doing something with that part of the equation mean that you have a better outcome in the full equation? And then, obviously there's a back and forth on that as well.
Can you explain TIF dollars to me?
Tax increment fine. Oh, you're asking me as a person?
No, I mean that's the thing. You have to.
Question.
That's your favorite question?
No, that's not my favorite question, but I've asked that question before. I mean, and maybe not in that exact way, but it's kind of, they might give a question about, well, we can use TIF dollars for that. It's like, no, I don't know if you can use TIF dollars for that. I'm not gonna give you a direct, backhanded slap type of a question to ask on a follow-up like that, but I'm gonna be like, let's look at this at a different angle. And no, you're probably not supposed to use TIF dollars for that. You try to do it in a gentle manner, and maybe saying that it's a backhanded question is maybe not the right thing to say. But you've once again, the people are listening to it, and they need to know the information. They need to know what their politicians are thinking. They need to know the transparency of government and how those people are going to be transparent with government. It has to be done.
You're there to help hold people accountable.
Yeah.
You're doing the base of the job. Okay, couple of things here as we get close to the end.
Okay.
Because I see, you and I, Bob, could talk for a long time and have. So let's I asked you earlier about that first radio broadcast about all the crew. Tell me what your situation is now when you show up on press row. Let's just take when you go courtside at the Casey Center next time for a state team, what will you be there with?
I will be there with a laptop computer that'll be hooked into a soundboard that is hooked in with a USB cord. I mean, I don't think we would have imagined the word USB cord 30 years ago. The only cord we were worried about are going from the microphone to the back of the mixer, and the cord going from the mixer to the phone line. But you get that all hooked up. You hope you have an internet connection, and I'm like a lot of places, I think, too. I usually typically run my own game, so that means I'm hooked through that laptop computer back to the computer here in the studio and putting myself on the air, playing all the commercials, putting the radio station back on the air after the ball game, and making sure that it's back on the air. And yeah, none of that technology would have been even thought of or dreamt of 30 years ago.
And you can time shift broadcasts if need be, or you just run them on sub channels now because you can do them off websites.
I guess I don't understand your question.
Well, there's times, I think, don't you? It used to be we have our regular game from 7 to 9:30, and then at 9:30 we're going to run the other game that was in the other town. Now, do you do that, or do you just run them both at the same time?
No, I mean, we've typically it's been two different stations or multiple stations at the same time, just because you don't have somebody back here to record it and put it back on the air.
Okay. Also, biggest, you mentioned a state championship run there for Clear Lake football. What's been two of the biggest sports stories you've covered in your time?
Ooh, that is a good one. I would say, Clear Lake's baseball team, they had a good run of 3 out of 4 years where they had state championship baseball teams. And that was a great bunch of kids that could have coached themselves. I mean, they were just, tremendous athletes. And, they could have, they unfortunately had made one mistake in that year, that they did not make it into the state tournament. They lost in the sub-state final. Had it been not for that one mistake, they would have won 4 state championships. There's no doubt in my mind. Clear Lake 2000 state football championship team, the Final Four in 2000. I don't think there were many people that had picked Clear Lake to end up being the champion, because they had to, in the championship game, they had to face Harlan, which back then was, the best team in the state year after year after year at that 3A level. And to go 3 overtimes and beat Harlan in that contest, that was an incredible story. And, because once again, they were the underdogs, and they were able to win that game, and, kind of set a tone for the success in Clear Lake overall, since then, the last 25 years. I mean, they had some good teams in the late 90s. There were good baseball and softball teams in the late 90s as well. I mean, they really started with those groups of teams really setting the tone for the success that Clear Lake has had through the years.
And now your 2 biggest news stories. You knew this was coming.
Yeah, 2 biggest news stories. Let's see. I mean, doing all the stuff around when the 9/11 attacks happened, because we were able to localize that, tremendously. I mean, I remember the day I was in the newsroom and that all started to happen. And then the biggest thing was getting all the information from back then ABC News on the air, because we had went from the little flip rotators on the satellite to these newfangled satellite receivers like they are now. I had no clue how to get the things changed over from ABC or from what we needed to put on the air. Ever since that day, I've learned how to do that. Made sure every time we get a new different type of satellite receiver in the building, yep, you're going to show me how to do this, because you never know when that's going to happen again. But just going out and seeing, there had been at the airport a Minnesota Department of Corrections plane that was flying prisoners back. They had to land in Mason City because they could not go any further because of the ground. I mean, there was things like that. Just trying to track down whatever local angle you could with that story. I mean, covering several murder trials that have had an impact on the community. It's really hard to think, one or two news stories, because I mean, they just get so jumbled in your mind, and you don't want to put one ahead of another, I think.
Well, and you were early in your career when Jody Huisentruit disappeared.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because that just hit my mind too. And, that is one story that in the back of my mind, I've always hoped that I could cover the end of it, when my career ends. Because I was in Decorah when that happened in late June of 1995, and I moved back in July, and I was basically at that point thrown into the story because, at that point it was still a fresh enough story. There were still press conferences every so often, once a week, maybe, if not twice or three times a week at that point, trying to get updates on the case. And obviously that has just been something that's lingered, through my whole, 30 years. That, once again, I've always thought that in the back of my mind. I hope I can cover the end of that, because I'm pretty much the only one left in the area covering that story. I mean, Robin Wolfram's up at KAL and in Rochester and Austin. She might be the only other one that's actively, in the news game that would be covering that story. And every so often, like you say, you get something, and then you hope maybe this is it. And then, of course, it isn't. But I just wish that for the family, for everybody that's been impacted, that worked with Jody Huisentruit at KIMT, during that time, I just wish there was an end to that case, and I don't know if there'll ever be one.
And the end of this interview means I'm to ask you, what's the lead line of Bob Fisher's biography?
Oh, I think it would be, someone who served the listeners of North Central Iowa the best he could, whether it was the news or the sports, or, even, going out and doing some community service things. I'm still involved with music stuff. So, I mean, I would hope something that would linger into that first couple of lines as well. But, it's been great to still know that we're relevant, and that the people, when we were gone with local news on these radio stations, that people were clamoring to still have it, and they obviously are still appreciating the work that we do.
In the next hour with Bob Fisher, we'll talk about his involvement in Tuba Christmas and the North Iowa Band Festival Parade, as well as Music Man Square, and all the jobs that have come and gone over the years. That's just in hour 2 with you, Mr. Fisher.
That would be fun, wouldn't it? No.
It would. I appreciate your time. Thank you for all of your work over the years there, Bob. I know North Iowans have appreciated it, and I'm glad that they realize that when you're gone, they need you.
Well, I appreciate everything that they have expressed here, especially in the last couple of weeks, getting back on the job. And Paul, I appreciate taking the time out and to talk about the Mason City radio story a little bit more.
Along with producer Cliff Brockman, I'm Paul Yeager. Our guest today, Bob Fisher, KGLO, Mason City, KRIB. You know him, you love him. Thank you so very much for watching this oral history, which is brought to you by the Archives of Iowa Broadcasting, based at Wartburg College in Waverly, Iowa.